That's at least something. And now I need to get rid of the control bar here. This control bar is not going away. Okay, so I'll skip this couple of slides for in a second. And just get directly into the deep dive and let's do this later. Okay, so today is going to be about cybersecurity as a main topic in the morning at least, and we have three presenters for you, including myself. A next speaker has already joined online, and the third speaker will be dropping in from 2 floors up. And what we also have in mind for you as part of the deep dive is to take a visit in the analysis lab. Good morning. Hello, Mina. Good morning. In the analysis lab, where you will be brought in by Leonard, who will be talking also this morning, the guy that actually hacked my car. And he will be explaining you a little bit on how they do actually deep dive analysis on equipment and on machinery. So that's going to happen later this morning in smaller groups of 10 people. And then by noon, we'll finish up and we'll move from this room to the room upstairs on the 5th floor, where we have a management, where we have the boardroom, and where we can actually have the management board more around the table, which will be slightly more convenient. So to start with, and also for people participating online, so welcome. My name is Ulrich Seldesacht. I'm the managing director of LSEC. LSEC is an association of IT security companies that has been around for 2 decades, as you can see. We were founded here in Leuven, actually in the building next door, partially by this group of engineers, and together also with computer scientists and with the legal department. And we today have a membership of IT security companies in the first place, about 850 of them, global IT security companies, so working either from the US or China, or local companies that we also support in development activities. Some of those you will also be meeting today. And then we reach out to about 15,000 end user companies, which are enterprise companies in manufacturing, industrial companies, retail, and many other different sectors and segments. We have different working groups where we bring basically supply and demand, if you can call it this way, together. But it's more in a concept of collaborating, working together on fighting a challenge which is called cybersecurity, which is not to be handled, as we'll also be talking about this morning, by just one single company in itself. So there's a need in any case for a collaborative approach, working together, thinking about new ways of approaching the challenges of cybersecurity. Now, cybersecurity, when you think of this, you typically think of a group of hackers, as it's been usually promoted, I'd say, in media. Groupings like Anonymous, and in other instances, more appropriate even today, actually states like Russia, like China, which are popping up regularly as, in this case, also malicious groups of hackers, of scientists and computer engineers to some extent as well, which are trying to target systems. And in this case, for instance, Russia against Ukraine, but also Russia against the rest of the world, and the same also for China. But this goes much further, of course, than only these specific groups. There's also obviously North Korea, And then there's also friendly member states which are trying to use cyber and cybersecurity vulnerabilities as means to exploit intelligence gathering, as means to exploit maybe even industrial espionage, or use it as many different leverages. But this morning we're going to focus on a couple of things as part of the deep dive session. And as you know already from the start, when we joined TRINITY as a partner and in this consortium of activities that we do, we started to make sure that you get the message that we are trying to elaborate on. That is, do not trust machines, do not trust robots, do not trust IT to a large extent. And this concept actually has gone further over the last 2 to 3 years that we have also worked together. There's now a concept which is called zero trust, which is taking quite a significant development also within the realms of IT security, which is going to further develop over the next couple of years. And without going too much into detail, it actually says as a principle, every machine that's connected, every user that's connected to an environment, simply do not trust it. And which means that you take it completely from the other perspective than just connecting people to your networks. You first have to be able to establish a very good basis for trust before you allow them on the network, before you allow applications to run, before you allow systems to operate. So as a first thing, what I wanted to do, and there's actually 3 main topics, if you like, in this deep dive of this morning, at least from my side. And I won't be able to get through all of the depth of it, and I'll switch it left and right, also with the other presenters here. But to start off, basically, the main risk today happening in the world of manufacturing that we as a group are still highly focused on, also from within TRINITY and as also the main target audiences within Agile manufacturing and IoT, is of course the world of manufacturing. And what we've seen in 2021 and still seeing in 2022, that in the domain of, and can you see it a little bit? I know it's a bit shaded, but still. The manufacturing domain as an industry is the #1 target for everything in relation to ransomwares. So it's the industry which is highly under attack. And the under attack phrase, I would also like to diminish a little bit from the beginning, because ransomwares are in principle an automated mechanism which are being set up by criminal groups, simply the same way that you would be starting up your laptop and that the operating system is starting to open up and you're launching your Outlook or word processor machine. It's in a very similar way that ransomwares today are happening. And to take that a little step further, how that really happens is in a way that we have explained in previous sessions on cybersecurity, when we went into the discussions also on the different particular use cases that you guys have been working on. That is basically every system has its vulnerabilities, and those vulnerabilities can be exploited. So it's automatically searching for vulnerabilities in systems. It's automatically trying to understand how these systems can be exploited, and then injecting basically ransomwares on those openings that are being created. So it's not that always a very specific company or you as a company are targeted. So what we sometimes hear is companies, especially SMEs, saying us, yes, but we're a small company. We're only doing like 500,000 turnover, and we only have like 5-6 people. So why would we be even considered by hackers in this case? Well, that's not, of course, the case. The case is simply that if you have systems and those systems are exposed online, they will be automatically targeted by these means. And then what happens is something like this. So your computer has been infected, and this could be an image that you might see. So just quick raise of hands. I hope it's going to be nobody, but has anybody had this experience already? Did anybody get an attack from a ransomware? Okay, that's already a good thing. So we'll dive a bit deeper, because this is, of course, still the number one challenge. And it's going to be the number one challenge for the next year and the next years likely to come. Because what we see also from the industry is that the groups behind these ransomware developments are just continuing further on the same basis. They have built a business around this. They have built business models around this. And those business models, they work for them. They do bring turnover to them. I mean, it's a business like any other to some extent. It's, of course, criminal activities, but they can earn their money from it. And it's very difficult also for law enforcement to act upon them, because when law enforcement finds a group, they try to put them down. When we as an industry, we find solutions on how to cope with the ransomwares, basically with the malware that are being deployed. We can try to help that by patching and by giving technological solutions to prevent it from happening. But when a new exploit will be found or can be done thanks to a new vulnerability that can be discovered, it will pop up. So has been the case in quite a number of large companies also last year, 2021, and still also the case in 2022. So a notorious ransomware gang called Leuven, they were, for instance, behind a large cyber attack on JBS. JBS is a US group doing meat production type of facilities. So they were directly basically under attack, but not only under attack, they had also an immediate impact, of course, under that business. So that business has gone out for a couple of weeks, which is also something that we see happening in quite many cases. We've had some ransomware attacks happening also in a number of companies here in Belgium, some companies also very near to us. And basically the same happened there. Companies went out of business for weeks, even months. Actually, the first time that I presented in a deep dive session on this, which I think is already 3 years ago in Chemnitz, we just had one of those companies in Belgium that had this attack. And it was just happening at the time that I was talking about it. And it took them another 3-4 months to actually recover from the situation. So, and even today, the company hasn't really been fully recovered. They were actually just in the process of being acquired by another company. It actually caused this company's valuation to be dropped by 2/3. So just imagine how destructive that such a ransomware or such types of activities can actually have an impact on a business. So how does it work in this case, Leuven, without going too much into detail, because I don't think it's really that much of relevance to you, but just to give you a little bit of an idea on how, in this case, Leuven worked. They used what's called Kaseya as an agent. And Kaseya basically is a service management system. So that does unified IT management and security. And maybe also similar to another case that you might have heard about. I'll talk about that in a second, which is called Solarwinds. So basically system management software that were used as a host to carry the ransomware. So you can say, okay, well, I thought that ransomwares were only in vulnerabilities going to be exploited. Well, yes, that's the case, but you have to have a sort of carrier mechanism. And in many cases, the carrier mechanism is email. So you receive an email, you click on the link, which you're not supposed to be clicking on. Always double check the emails that you're getting and double check whether this is a legit link. So when you click on it, and in this case, the same, I mean, those would be the carriers of the ransomware. And then the ransomware arrives in your environment. And then usually you have a system like, for instance, Windows Defender, which are there to actually help you and prevent these things from entering. But in this case, the ransomware was even able to circumvent the Windows Defender mechanism. So just to give you the indication that many of those ransomware groups, they're getting quite sophisticated, not only in the way that they distribute, but also in the way that they can understand how you try to defend yourself. So basic defense mechanisms are not sufficient. you really have to think carefully, and you really have to think in this way, as also something that I mentioned in previous cases, in a process-oriented way on how to defend yourself from potential dangers, like in this case ransomwares. But dangers can also come from somewhere else. I'll talk about that in a second as well. So this is an example, not for specifically from a manufacturing environment, but from a healthcare institute, basically a hospital. So an example of a ransomware attack that happened in a hospital, in a care center, in the midst of COVID. And as you can see, it started October 28, 2020, and it took them 40 days as a hospital in the midst of a serious crisis to try to get some views back on the radiology systems. So something relatively crucial in case of hospital. So just imagine in your case also for production or for our partners which are using our systems in production environments, that they are being challenged through a ransomware attack thanks to one of the systems that we provided them. So just imagine how that affects not only the production, the company, its business, its value, its people, because people will need to go on temporary unemployment. But just taking it a step further, also back to you, because you've been the supplier or the partner of this company. And so how it actually impacts the, not only in this case, the manufacturing company itself, but also its customers, which are waiting for the supplies. Likely also its suppliers, because they're not purchasing anything anymore. So it's impacting the whole ecosystem, and which is another major thing that happened in 2021 and still today, and originated from 2020. What we see now is that from cybersecurity perspective, those ransomwares are high on the agenda still today, but we're looking much more than just into one single company. We're looking into the whole supply chain, as we call it, into the whole ecosystem. Before getting into this, as I mentioned to you, I mean, the whole thing about ransomware, it's being run as a service. So it's basically an as a service model that the hackers are using, which means that there's somebody developing a piece of ransomware. It's basically a piece of software. There's no law at this point in time against developing crimeware. There's no law against developing a piece of ransomware. There is a law, of course, in hacking and on cybercrime and cybercriminality, but it's basically those who are deploying the ransomware which are to be considered as offensive, and the ones developing the software themselves usually cannot be targeted. So if we would be engineering here a piece of ransomware, which we sometimes can do, just for the sake of, let's say, the research activities, there's no harm in that. But it's really when you start to exploit it at somebody else's machine without having that permit that you're getting into crime. And then the next thing, of course, that happens is the extortion, which is part of it. Of course, you can also drop malwares and without doing anything about it, or you can use the malwares, or in this case, maybe the ransomwares to a lesser extent, to actually retrieve data from an endpoint. So with then the purpose of not so much encrypting the system, what we would be seeing in ransomwares, but actually using the data that's being collected and then to publish it again on the dark web or some other place, or resell it to, for instance, groups in Russia or China or other potential competitors of you. So, and that's also not really included in this domain of ransomware as we see it. But it's another domain of attacks that we do see happen quite often. Not so long ago, a company very close by got all of their data, their industrial data stolen, more than 5 terabytes of industrial blueprints, of microchips, of devices which are being produced for industries like, for instance, communication, medical devices, you name it. So that data was stolen from this company, and it's being resold to them, not on the means of ransomware, but it's being basically also a form of extortion, So if you don't pay us, we're going to sell your software and all of the data to whatever, the highest bidder or whoever wants to buy it from us. It's here's the link. You can find pieces of your data on the dark web. So that also happens. So just imagine all of the engineering work that you have been doing and preparing for over the last couple of years, and at some point in time you find that data somewhere open on the dark web or even on the internet for that matter. So that happens too. And then the third pillar here is cryptocurrencies, because of course we have developed also from the cybersecurity world, if you like, the mathematics engineering departments like we have here. We have developed mechanisms also to allow for international transactions to take place, which can be completely secured, namely cryptocurrencies. And so these cryptocurrencies, like for instance, Bitcoins, are now obviously also being used because they are to some extent relatively anonymous. So they can be used to actually pay out, in this case, the criminals. And also, that's a bit of a heads up for an exercise later on this morning. Just try to imagine how easy it will be for you to buy Bitcoins. Anybody that has Bitcoins, by the way? 1, 2, okay. You know what? How many do you have, Jirki?
The value currently is in
In tens
tens of euros.
of euros. Okay. Okay. So you have a little piece of a Bitcoin then. Okay. All right. So and how difficult will it be for you to buy just additional Bitcoins? Okay, if you have at least also because the price has been going down. All right. So one of the main things on this is, and that's also one of the key messages that I want to talk about on this topic in particular, is be prepared. And not only be prepared from, let's say, US organizations, also from within the groups that you're working, and also, of course, for the type of activities that you're doing. You're building systems based upon IT. So think about these on how they can be better prepared, but also think about if tomorrow you would have been under attack from a ransomware, how would you start acting? So prepare a little bit because it will come back later on this morning. So some other attacks in a similar way that has been Colonial Pipeline last year. Those guys paid hackers $4.4 million. Also something for you already to start thinking about. Should you pay them or shouldn't you? So it's more than an ethical question. It's a practical question. But at some point in time, it will also return as an ethical question. Because of course, when you pay out criminals, it means that you're actually supporting that business model. And it doesn't always mean, therefore, that it's going to be a cheaper solution. Because sometimes what we see is, you get the decrypted disk back of the things that have been encrypted. But just imagine that you get basically a flat disk back with documents and files and everything on the same root directory. And just imagine how long it will take you to distribute everything back on the right place. And this usually happens 99% of the times. You're not getting your data back in the same state as it used to be. And then still, you don't even know which parts are still there because they also, of course, had a copy and they also have the key to unlock, which means that they still have a copy of the original data as well. So what do you do? How can you be certain that they're not going to knock back on your door the next day and ask you for the same amount of ransom? So there's some things to consider there. Another main element that we're seeing happening, and then I'll switch over to you, Dieter, in a couple of seconds, is what we see is what we call business executive fraud, and also something that I would like to raise in this deep dive. These things are for us in cybersecurity land, I would say, trivial, both ransomwares and business executive fraud. We see them happening on a day-to-day basis, but we are not so interested anymore in those things, if you like. But I'm still showing you here because they are still high on the agenda of the things that we are seeing popping up. But they're of less interest to us because it's not that much of a challenge anymore to really cope with it. There are solutions, there's processes. People still need to adopt to the process and the technologies, and they don't do that. So that's the reason why I'm still trying to get you a little bit of background here. Now, what's business executive fraud? It's as simple as what you can read from it out of the title in itself. It's basically if you have the authorities on signing basically in a purchase order or signing off on an invoice that's entering into the company, or you have access to basically accounts and sending out of accounts. Salah, this is specifically for you. So there, then we will target you. We will send you an email targeted, and it will include some basic messages that you would know. Okay, this is an email coming from Ulrich from LSEC, so you trust me, obviously. Without that, say again. Do I? Yeah, yes, you do. And from this on, there's a couple of links in there. Yeah, here's an invoice which we recently sent. And so without Salah knowing, she is actually going to transfer it to another account because somebody mainly hijacked my email and they sent it out to Salah under my account. So these things happen much more often than ransomwares. And that's the main thing that I would like to report here. I mean, in losses, 2.4 billion have been reported on business executive fraud. So this happens far more often, and it's also far more attractive for hackers because it brings them much more money, of course. Also very difficult to trace afterwards. Here it says under this study that the ransomware brought to the hackers about 49 million. I would probably disagree there. I think it's been much more, and likely more in the range of about 600 to 700 million. Especially for 2021, but I mean, those figures are very unclear, but it's pretty clear that there's still lots of money going into the world of cybercrime. So I'll stop here basically to make sure that Dieter, who we have on the other side of the Zoom, is able to participate and to present his cases and still finish up also in a timely manner. Dieter, is that okay for you?
That's okay for me, but I'll have plenty of time enough, so I'll make up for your time.
Good. So. All right. I'll stop sharing now, and I'll hand it over to you.
Okay, I'll share my screen. Share. Is this visible?
We can see your screen, yeah.
Just let me start the slideshow. Is it still visible, my slides?
Now, yeah.
I'll have to screen share this.
See if I can expand it further. So you have to explain a bit what's on the slides in any case, because the beamer here is highly light, I would say.
No problem. I'll talk to it. So, it's okay.
Yeah.
So
Should.
Good morning, everybody. So my name is Dieter Sarden from Mqtt. Too bad I'm not in Leuven today, but with a working wife and kids returning from school at noon on Wednesday, that's a little bit impossible for me to be there. Anyhow, I'll talk a bit about cybersecurity in operational environments. But first, what is actually an operational environment? And a second topic I'll highlight here is the difference between brownfields and greenfields. You might probably well know the difference already, but I'll explain some interesting things and typicalities from each things. So in operational environment, there's no such thing as one single unique operational environment. So every single organization out there has either one or even multiple operational environments within a company. As you also probably well know that there's big differences between different sectors. For example, sector-specific requirements, like in Belgium, we have the nuclear regulator, the the FUNC, which is imposing several security rules and guidelines to follow. For pharma, we have GMP things that has to be followed, has to be done as well, and so on and so on and so on. But they all share common goals, of course. They all have a common goal of having a good availability. That's primordial within operational environments. So the availability is one unique requirement. They all share safety requirements, both for environment and people. Some operational environments do have more strict safety requirements than others, of course, but in the end, it comes down to the same. They have to protect the environment, they have to protect people. And with the upcoming NIS2 rules, more and more organizations will have to follow those NIS2 rules. So that's also a common goal they have to share. Another thing that needs to be taken into account within any single operational environment is that engineers and operational people are inventive, meaning they will always find a way to circumvent any security rules or measures you try to apply or implement. They will always find a way. A simple example here is within a power plant in Belgium. I once had to install or configure or make it secure to at least a remote access connection for a vendor. So at that time, to our DSL lines, they installed a modem, a DSL modem with a firewall and the vendor network behind it. So all is secure. But a week after, we found out that the wireless was enabled on that modem. So engineers using the wireless to surf or browse the web at night shifts. Okay, we come in again, we disable the wireless. But a month later, we saw a cable dangling from the ceiling down to the DSL modem. So they just drilled a hole in the floor from the operating room to the DSL line to still be able to browse the web. So that's why engineers, operating people are also always inventive to circumvent security measures. And nowadays, we also have the increasing connectivity. So 5G is coming. In Belgium, there are, I think, at this time, two operational 5G networks. Brussels Airport is one. I think the ports are the second one. But 5G will be coming more and more, which means that connectivity requirements will always increase. This is also the case with vendors positioning their equipment that are just 5G enabled, and you plug it in, it works. So this is also something to take into account. We also have to take into account more than just the logical aspects. So it's not only this, it's not only the network, it's not only the corporate network, the IT network, or the operational network, but it's also everything else. So the suppliers, your customers, your competitors, your regulators, and your strategic partners. So we have to take into account the larger operational environment than just your own small world inside your organization. Now, the differences between brownfield and greenfields. So brownfields, mostly, well, it works, do not touch. So I don't know if you have received those remarks already, but that's mostly within every brownfield I run into. Just do not touch, do not implement security, do not patch, do not do whatever. But with every brownfield, if you want to implement cybersecurity, and if you have the chance to implement cybersecurity, it will require a lot of small baby steps to get where you want to. So for a certain environment, it took, for example, 4 years to get them aware, to get them going. And now we're even 10 years later behind those 4 years. And in that environment, we're only halfway of implementing cybersecurity within a brownfield. So that's why I also say cybersecurity changes also require a change in cybersecurity culture, because it has to have an effect of changing the mindset of people, has to effect of changing the way they think, changing the way they work. So it's no longer just plugging in and do what you need to do, it might take some other actions to be done first. As already mentioned, brownfields are getting more and more interconnected with other networks because the previously closed networks are opening up. Whether you like it or not, it's the fact. So it's no longer only connected to the IT environment, but more and more also interconnected to cloud environments. So the facts of brownfields are also so that basic security is often lacking. I'm not saying always, it's often lacking. It's often flat networks, no AV, no patching, and so on and so on. You might be surprised, but I'm still running into organizations that are like this, just a flat network, IT, OT mixed. Legacy. There are still environments out there who are running XP. Yes, true. Those organizations often do not know what is out there in their environment, so no inventory. And they also have, not always, but also have a lot of black boxes in the environment. So devices that are placed by vendors or integrators that they were told not to be touched because they would lose warranty, they would lose functionality and things like that. So those are also unknowns within the environment. And then also still today, sometimes malware or ransomware outbreaks within those brownfields because all the things I've said before. Even within large organizations, where there's might be a mix of brownfields and greenfields, there are still outbreaks on malware. They catch it already, but it's still out there. So these are also the concerns and the issues a lot of brownfields have. So no visibility, IT/OT convergence, no or incomplete asset inventories, no configuration tracking, protocols that are unknown, outdated equipment. And here we also see no network segmentation and things like that on this drawing. So a lot of challenges to be done. Within greenfields, you would think that working in greenfields is easier. But if you read the second line on my slide here, so trust your vendors and integrators, but verify everything they do. Well, that's a big thing that has to be done within greenfields. I've been doing a lot of vendor security challenges, to say like that. I've been doing a lot of security FAT and SAT testing, and every single time the vendors are not doing what they should do, or are trying to work around the security rules you are implying. So they are not always that cooperative on cybersecurity level. Unfortunately, we often receive remarks like, we cannot change our product because it's built like that. Okay, we can understand. They do not understand cybersecurity. That's questionable nowadays. We only work with our own remote access solutions. That's from cybersecurity point of view, out of organizations, unacceptable. Our protections, oh, there's a slight error out. This should be our product connects to the cloud. That's in fact with more and more devices, like I said already, more and more devices have built-in enhanced connectivity possibilities, 4G, 5G, wireless, Bluetooth, whatever. So it's always enabled. Yes, you can disable it, but you have, or the user can simply re-enable it by inserting a dongle or by using the default admin password, for example. So within greenfields, you have similar challenges, but the biggest challenge within greenfields is actually your vendor, your integrators, because they have to help you by installing and configuring everything properly. And you as an organization have the chance to perform cybersecurity testing to make sure that everything is verified what they do. Now, how can this be fixed? I'd like to keep on saying that the basic stuff needs to be done at all times. So I heard already say that the basic security is no longer working. Well, I still keep on saying that basic security things are necessary. You cannot live without, but you might do additional stuff next to the basic security to have a full coverage of your cybersecurity posture. So the first thing is set up security teams. You might think, well, I have already cybersecurity teams. Well, have you included all these different groups within your organizations? So maintenance, operations, security, IT, if security is not part of IT, management or risk management, safety and legal. So you should have a representative of each of these groups, maybe even more groups within your organization to have your security team. You might ask the question, why is legal in there? Well, often you have discussions with vendors on certain aspects of contracts. That's why legal is in there. Select the security framework. On this slide, it's IEC 62443, but it can be even NIS or NIS2 or the ISO 27, whatever is good for your organization. The big thing here is that you should have a security framework selected and implement parts or all of the things that are mentioned. So for organizations itself, it's mainly the first two ones, so general policies and procedures, but component and system things can be used to verify implementations of vendors, for example. Implement network zoning. There's still, I think it's already 10, 15 years ongoing, that the deperimeterization story, well, a lot of attacks, a lot of things can be blocked or circumvented by network zoning. So if you have, for example, systems within the level 1s and 0s, if they are not allowed to go out to the internet, for example, a lot of attacks might be blocked already. But of course, we have to include the cloud into the network zoning. And we have to be sure that the devices and systems follow a well-known path if they have to connect to either IT or cloud. One thing here is that changing or implementing network zoning can require another way of working and will require a lot of baby steps if not done properly and if done in a brownfield. In greenfields, it might be simpler, but then you have the vendor discussions where certain devices need to be placed in what zone and what levels and things like that. So if they come up with the question or the remark like, hey, my device needs to be able to connect directly to the internet, well, that might be no-go within network zoning, of course. Great visibility. Like I've said, one of the challenges is that there's not enough visibility within the network, brownfields and greenfields. So a monitoring solution could be a solution for that, but you have to be aware of the many false positives. Why I say potential many false positives? Well, you are depending on the threat analysis of the monitoring solution vendor. To give you an example, one of my customers has a monitoring solution implemented. And there was already, I think already over a month, every single day alerts of potential connections to IP addresses with known malware. So first of all, we thought, well, that's not good. We have to analyze those systems that are trying to connect to those IP addresses, which we did with no results. So everything was clean, but the connections kept on coming. Well, in the end, it turned out to be 2 IP addresses that are from the Microsoft cloud, used for Microsoft updates. They are part of the Azure cloud, and they were flagged by their own threat analysis team as being malicious, because back one day at a time, they served some malware. Voila. So that's why beware of the many false positives. A monitoring solution will or can help with mapping out your network, as the little drawing says, but not always. Grading visibility will also allow you to know the different ways into getting into your control network. So you have, for example, unsecure remote locations, unsecure modems, infected laptops, and things like that. So without visibility, you just don't know. You hope that nothing will happen. But this is how you could try to get to the path of your control network. So you could try to analyze the kill chain, the ICS kill chain for your own environments. With that said, inventory management, a lot of organizations, a lot of OT organizational teams already have some inventory, most of the times Excel. It still works for what they need. So that's why they have something, but existing things need to be consolidated into a large inventory management solution. Another thing that's often forgotten, it's less done, still part of the basic security measures, is performing hardening. So all things that could pose a risk to a system or environment are candidates for potential hardening without impacting functionality of said system or environment. So the last part of the sentence is really important. Whatever hardening you're trying to do, make sure that functionality of the system is not impacted. I've been doing hardening exercises already for 15 years, and every single time people are just click and play, taking click and play approaches to doing hardening. Just follow a script that they found somewhere or received somewhere, just run it. Hey, it doesn't work anymore. What's happening? So that's a problem with hardening. But another thing, that when should you do hardening? Well, first of all, during projects for new systems and refurbished systems, when you do upgrades, when you do changes, that's the moment when you can do hardening. So mostly at the next maintenance stops or just before commissioning. And why would you do hardening? Well, to close identified security weaknesses. So depending, of course, on what security level it is, if it's a critical security level, it might be solved with just applying a patch, but sometimes you cannot apply patches and need to do hardening in certain ways. Now, potential problems with hardening. If you have an insecure system, you have to first determine if hardening is possible or not. So does hardening impact the functionality, yes or no? If it doesn't, we can do the hardening. If we cannot do the hardening, so hardening is not possible, we have to verify, can we upgrade the system or not? Then the second question is, can we replace the system or not? Or can we isolate the system or not? So if all those answers are no, we have potentially cybersecurity disaster waiting to happen. Hopefully not, but that might be the case. Peripheral ports, another part of hardening. It's often not done, to say it like that. And if it's done, it's always done in an incomplete way. So here you see four options, not five, four options. The first of all is disabling the operating system. That's the easiest. Second one is disabling the BIOS, but for USB ports, if you disable all USB ports in the BIOS, well, you might have a problem with USB keyboards and mouse. This third one is insert port blockers, so physical port blockers. But if you have physical access to a system, that's very easily removed by using priors or something else. And the least favorite way is creating a physical enclosure of a device. Disabling NOS, if the operating system is not maintained on another way with patches and stuff like that, you might be able to circumvent this. So that's can be considered the least secure way, but also the least intrusive way. The big thing is here, peripheral ports need to be controlled and properly secured as well. The testing strategy. Now, how would you know what to do if you do not test and verify your systems? So I also already mentioned FATSA testing, but that FATSA testing should be implemented within a quality process. Next to FATSA testing, you should do regular testing on existing environments, even in brownfields, where they say or mention that you should not touch the environments. And all new and upgraded equipment should have FATSA security testing. Now, the big thing is always include logical human and physical elements within every single cybersecurity test you do. Do not only look at logical aspects, do not only look at human aspects or physical aspects, include them all in all your security testing. So look at the big picture. So here helps the what if game. What if I unplug the printer? What if I plug my laptop in it? Where do I have access to, for example? So increasing security by testing, identification of security issues, verifying compliance, creating awareness, and so on and so on. You might ask the question, how can you create awareness by doing security testing? Well, it's simple. Invite your vendor or integrator with any security test you do and show them physically on the device. If you do something, what happens? This is most effectively when you do, for example, operator jailbreak out tests. Every single time the vendor says, "Whoa, I didn't know this." What else do I need to say about this slide? So graduating, increasing your security in your environment. Now, the question also is, when you do security SAT testing, if you have this, for example, this project lifecycle, so you have procurement, engineering, construction, commissioning, and operation, the best moments in doing security FAT and security SAT testing is in the construction and commissioning phases. You might say that runs together with the regular functional FAT and SAT testing. Yes, it's true. But at this time, if you do security FAT together with the functional FAT, operators or engineers will know the behavior of security things on their environment already. So if the system breaks or fall down because of you do a port scan, for example, hopefully it's no longer the case today, but sometimes it happens, then they know what the actions will need to be taken from their part. You also see here at the most left, setting security requirements. That's not to be forgotten. Also the same with the risk assessment. And of course, at the most right, you have the determination of the residual risk with everything that cannot be fixed by applying hardening, by applying regular security measures. You have to find a way of managing the residual risks. This is the last slide already. Do not solely focus on logical cybersecurity. Include logical, physical, and user aspects. So logical are IT, OT, cloud. Physical are perimeter, room, and device. So not only the perimeter security, not only the room, but the bigger picture. And include your vendors in the question here, in the cybersecurity question. With one remark here, your vendors, you should include them, but those vendors themselves should be ready to listen to their customers to implement cybersecurity, of course. Well, that being said, I'm ready. I don't know if there are questions.
I'm going to look around here to see if there's any questions, Dieter. In any case, maybe you can elaborate a little bit because you didn't mention that. I mean, all of this is, of course, coming from your years of experience in
Yes.
in helping your customers, your partners in trying to secure themselves. So you explained a bit in the beginning. Okay, this is what we've seen. I think the reasoning that you have behind this is definitely convincing to us here. But yeah, I mean, it's so obvious all that sometimes it's a bit incredible in the sense that, or uncredible, that these things are still appearing.
Yes.
I know from the discussion that I've had with some of the people here around within this room, is that okay? By simply stating we're actually not connecting this equipment or machine to the internet, so therefore we consider it as not of an issue.
Exactly.
I assume that you hear that also quite often.
I also received of the same remark. Also, it wasn't in my slides, but that's the same remark that is received also. So we don't connect the device to anything, so it's secure from our point. So, or we do not need any data, we do not need any information from the device. Well, yeah, not now. So you might consider the device to be secure at this time, but the moment when the device would be connected, then you have to re-evaluate everything. To give an example on this, in the last, for one of my customers, my last FAT/SAT testing that I did, they also were a little bit lax on cybersecurity. saying that it was not patched until I think 6 months before, because the environment that was tested was considered to be a standalone environment, so not connected to anything. But during the FAT exercises, I heard that there were plans of connecting the device of the environment to a larger network within that organization anyhow. So I said at that time, look, whenever the device or the environment is connected to a environment, everything changes. So the moment you have interconnections, that's the moment you have to have strict security rules in place and strict security measures in place.
Yeah, and another thing that we've also discovered is that many of the devices, even considering that they're not connected, actually were connected. There was always some form of a Wi-Fi connection, Bluetooth connection, whatever, that was not noticeable until the moment that you did really a deep search on every connectivity that was going on.
Exactly, that was what I mentioned as well, is that if you have, see my slides are not shared anymore. I'll try to find my slide so if you have, for example, FAT testing, you have to look at every single port that is connecting or that is on the device. So every single Ethernet port, every single USB port, even serial ports, wireless devices, Bluetooth, and so on as well. So that's the moment when you have to check it. And as you mentioned already, also that during the security deep dives that you found those, well, if security FAT and SAT testing would be performed on those devices, it could have been found. Not always, it could have been found.
You also mentioned at the beginning, Dieter, that I mean, it's very much regulatory defined sometimes, and I think, and as I know, you've been working also in nuclear facilities.
Yes.
How is the, let's say, on a European level, the nuclear facilities, should they be worrisome to us today?
Should they be worrisome? On European level, you mean?
Yeah, worrisome, yes. How do we need to worry about them?
I can tell from the Belgian side that we do not have to worry about the Belgian sites. I cannot say anything about French sites, but I think the Dutch one in Borstel is also good on cybersecurity level, but I do not know anything about the French nuclear facilities close to our borders, to the Belgian borders. But from what I've been from, excuse me?
We can hammer on the French because there's no French here.
So yeah, I do not know, but I do know I'm working in dual anti-ange, and those sites I'm pretty confident that everything is okay. Yeah. Even for me, they can run 20-30 years longer if they want. But I also see from in European perspectives, so we have new nuclear plants being built in close to Cardiff in Wales. I recently saw that they are increasing their OT cybersecurity team, so I think that's also a good thing to happen. But that's an observation that I'm seeing, that more and more organizations are building OT cybersecurity teams, which is good, of course.
Yeah, and I think one consideration that I heard from actually one of your colleagues who did in nuclear was that the big concern here, at least in Belgium, is that many of the plants might be shut down, but there's still the question whether they are going to be shut down. So they're a little bit in limbo today.
You have from the 7 reactors in Belgium, 5 will be shut down. Yeah. That's a fact that is already pretty certain. 2, there's still the question: will they have to shut down or not? Because it's still not, as you say, still not decided, still not agreed by the government with NG.
And so, as a result, meaning that many of those operations that you should start planning about now, and also in terms of the operational cybersecurity of those plants, if you don't know if they will still need to run for another 10, maybe 20 years, it's difficult to start also planning for cybersecurity, of course, for this, because
Well, the one thing that remains important, as I said, you have to include logical, physical, and human elements. The physical security remains, but knowing that physical security nowadays is not only physical locks, but also an IT part in it, it still remains important. So this is part of the cybersecurity rules for, at least for Nucleum, but for any organization at least. So physical security is not only the physical part, it's also an IT part in it.
Okay, I have a question here from the floor. Person that you, I think, know, Mr. Wilmartier.
Thanks a lot for the presentation. So,
thank you.
One of our main findings is that, for example, in the level of OT/IoT, is that the expected lifetime of the devices largely exceeds the supported lifetime. So, for example, stupid example is, for example, you buy a television and it has patches for 3 years, and you have, I think, an expected lifetime of a television of 5 years or even to 10 years. Or other PLCs, for example, where they say, okay, we're going to patch it for 5 years, and then it's up to you. Where the expected lifetime of PLCs, for example, is often 30 years plus.
Yes.
So what's your advice on that one?
On handling cybersecurity for those older systems?
Well, let's say contractually, for example.
Well, contractually, if you have cybersecurity rules in most contracts nowadays, we try to implement or include at least the cybersecurity maintenance of things. So well knowing that patching might not be possible after 5 or 10 years anymore, if it's no longer supported by vendors. In that case, we could include statements like obsolete devices need to be replaced by equal functional devices with better security in place. But replacing those devices might be a big project within the lifetime of an organization, of a plant, for example. You do have system obsolescence. You do have to deal with system obsolescence. And one way is, well, there are two ways. Either you keep it, or the other one is you replace it. And I think that's the way to deal with obsolescence within organizations, if on cybersecurity level. It also depends on the criticality of your system.
Yeah, always go back to the risk assessment, of course.
Exactly, that's hinting to the risk assessment. If the risk assessment states that, for example, that particular system or environment in which a system is included is business critical, highly critical, then you have to make sure that it's the cybersecurity in place is also equally good, which means you might have to replace systems within those environments as well.
Another question that we regularly see in operational environments, I'm not sure how you deal with that, is in a manufacturing environment, you might have a supplier. Let's say, for the sake of, just as an example, not to pin them, Siemens. And Siemens is supplying most of the manufacturing equipment, all of the machinery. And of course, they also provide a service management. So what we then see is that in many plants, the people on the work floor, even the IT support teams, are not allowed to touch the equipment.
Yes, the so-called black boxes.
Yes. So how to deal with those in terms of cybersecurity? How do you deal with them?
Isolate them as much as possible. If you have black boxes, the only thing you can do is isolate them as much as possible. So only allow in and out what is absolutely necessary for your environment, nothing else.
Yeah. Okay. For the rest.
But I hope those black boxes will be disappearing more and more. That's at least my hope, because I do know that certain integrators are still selling maintenance contracts with the claim that you cannot touch them because then you lose your warranty. Well, like I said, vendors should be starting listening to their customers and should be allowing customers to, with their help, of course, to do actions on those systems to increase cybersecurity. So it's an inclusive story. So vendors should work together with their customers to increase cybersecurity for everybody. That's my belief.
All right. I'm looking around to see if there's any question. Yeah, another 2 questions popping up. I'll first go here. Just quickly say the name.
Eleanor Nelson, Digital Norway. Maybe this is a little bit on the side, but I mean, you do a lot to sort of prevent that systems are compromised. Still, sometimes the attackers are successful. So you mentioned here that if you are compromised, then what should you do? And what should you do? I mean, are there any best practices? Do you have any drills? Do you have any sort of experience in what actually works? Because at some stage, you need to negotiate with these guys, or ignore them, or at least do something.
Yeah.
So what's the best practice for that? I mean, you said that they were starting to get very professional. They have a business model. So what should you do? And we have to also remember that those that are attacked would probably be attacked for the first time, so they don't have any experience. Psychologically, they're under a great stress. So how to deal with it in practical terms?
Okay, if you are compromised, so I hope that there are already security measures in place, but assuming that you're running, that you're working in Brownfield, well, then you have a big problem, of course. If everything is in one single flat network, well, then you have, to be honest, then you have a pick and all story. That's not good. The best thing to deal with compromises, but potential compromises, is preparing for them, making sure that the necessary security measures are in place, making sure that you have taken the big decisions up front. So decisions like, do I disconnect the system or not? When you notice a compromise, do I disconnect the network or not? Do I shut down the power from the whole environment or not? Those big questions need to be asked upfront, need to be discussed with management upfront, so that you don't have any decision to be taken when you are actually dealing with a compromise. When you are dealing with a compromise itself, well, if those questions have not been taken up front or discussed up front, then I would try to disconnect or shut down power, or I don't know. But this will have a big impact, of course, on production. Huh?
I don't know, there's no option detail in your case. Yeah, suggestion here is coming from him, organizing tabletop exercises. And actually we'll be doing this sort of an exercise in about an hour, I guess, from here. So when Leonard, who just arrived, will be doing the next presentation, he's taking you up to the lab. The rest of us will be sitting down and doing a little bit of an exercise specifically on that topic to help you prepare. We have some good suggestions. But the tabletop exercise is basically sitting down with executive team, with IT team, people that might be called in for incident management, so your cybersecurity experts from outside, and basically sitting together and discussing, okay, what do we do in case of? So we'll start preparing this today, and then you take it back home and do the same exercise. And we can talk about it in a couple of weeks' time to see how that actually resulted. And what should come out of it is at least a plan, which could be like 5 lines, which could be a document of 50 pages describing, okay, this is a scenario. And the simplest thing would be, and I'm giving you already a couple of ideas on how to deal with it later on. The simplest thing could be, I'm calling expert X. They will be called in, they will help us doing so. Now, what you have to consider, those experts, like Dieter is one, they are already on the contract. So if you would like to get them at the point that you're in distress, you should make sure that you have a contract, a retainer, because otherwise they will not simply be able to support you.
The other thing you have to keep in mind also is that the moment there is a compromise, you are in firefighting mode. Then you just need to be doing whatever you need to be doing to make sure that it's not spreading, it's not making it worse. But as IT networks are typically rather quickly, they are still running behind. So yeah, the best attack, the best thing is preparation, is making sure that you have the basic security stuff done, and the big questions up front are answered already.
Yeah. And then the other thing that you can do is, of course, is do an exercise where you actually go a step further and test out the scenario that you have been putting in place.
Exactly, to play the what if game.
Yeah, and then you hire somebody in to do an attack from the outside, but on a controlled way. But you make sure that the whole company is not aware of it, or at least a couple of persons are aware of it, and that you can still manage it, of course. But then you see what really will pop out of it, and then you can also take the necessary actions afterwards to resolve. Nina.
This is Nina. I'm not exactly on the field of cybersecurity. I'm usually the user and product and manufacturing systems. If we have a case, I'm just wondering that what kind of a risk will a scenario could create. If we have a factory floor or any technical environment with autonomous systems and robots, etc. And we have done the cybersecurity assessment, we have done the testing and ensure that this physical environment where the machines are is safe. Well, then somebody decides to buy a smart screen. I have never updated my team. I don't think we have ever considered updating our monitors in our laboratory unless they update themselves automatically. So here comes the new smart TV, coupled nice looking new devices in the factory floor. And at the same time, somebody updates the coffee room with the new smart fridges and smart coffee machines. So in this kind of scenario, what kind of risk these new devices will pose? Because these are the devices we don't pay attention. We pay attention to the technical devices. These what we use for doing the work. But the auxiliary devices, how about the building information system, which might become also smarter? We have the sensors in the windows. They are connected to the Wi-Fi and connected to somewhere else. How much people pay attention on this?
It's the right question to ask. Absolutely.
Unfortunately, not enough people are paying attention to those devices. Because, and I said, take a step back, look at the big picture, which also means you have to take every single thing, every single device that comes into your environment into your eyes. So you should be verifying, as you said, smart coffee machines, smart TVs, smart whatever. You have to take everything that comes into your environment into account nowadays. You cannot rule anything out anymore. You cannot just assume that a device does not have any interconnectivity anymore. Everything has some way of connectivity in it nowadays. So as based on
it's really up to this league, so.
Yeah, to say a stupid example, for a certain customer, I'm doing security testing. They're building a greenfield, and there was a question popping up, like, look, we have here a big freezer coming in. Do we have to take a look at it? Yes, of course. We took a look at it. Well, there's Bluetooth enabled, there's wireless enabled, there's network connection, because they want to have the freezing temperatures on a nice screen somewhere. So yeah, you have to take everything into account.
Yeah. So the first thing is indeed to recognize that these things are there and that you might have a problem. The second thing is
just assume the things are there. You have a problem.
That's correct. The second thing is what Dieter was also saying is get a good perspective on your assets. So making sure that they're being recorded, that you have an understanding of what they are. And
not only IT assets, not only OT assets, also coffee machines, also screens, whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. So, but that's the first thing, huh? And then from there on is to try to what we do then, and that's actually the next topic on my agenda here, is to try to get what we call a bill of materials, a software and security bill of materials from the vendors. And what you can do is, in the next time that you work together with your procurement, is asking your vendors to provide you with this type of bill of materials. 99% of the chance they don't have it, but it's good to put it into the minds of the people in procurement that they should ask this from the vendors. And over time, and that's not going to be too long, my guess is in a year's time or so, it's going to be mandatory for the vendors, also including us as vendors, to provide this type of bill of materials. In the bill of materials, and I'll show that to you in a second, in the bill of materials, it also includes a description of the different software components and the potential vulnerabilities which are already known that need to be handled. And then the vendor is also asked to update those vulnerabilities on a regular basis. What that periodicity is, how regular that is not yet defined. There's also going to be lots of regulations on these things, but that's, I mean, that's really coming up now. There's this thing called the Cyber Resilience Act from the European Commission, which was, the idea was launched in September, but it's really going to mandate all of the vendors to come up with such a listing of potential vulnerabilities. In order, so if you would buy a device, then at least you should be made aware of its potential vulnerabilities. Okay, we're getting additional questions. Yes.
Hi, I should have from your Stefan Institute. So my question is, future robots are supposed to go out in public environments where you have no control actually over networks and whatever they're connected to. Of course, the physical security also becomes more difficult. So how do we deal with such systems in terms of cybersecurity?
So you mean systems within public environments within organizations, right?
Or just going outside of the organization actually.
Yeah, or systems going outside of the organization. Yes.
In what way? Outside in public areas or systems that are shipped to somewhere?
Consider indeed a robot going outside, mobile robots. Yeah.
A good question. In my opinion, every single system that leaves an organization is considered to be public. So, yeah. Maybe I don't have a straight answer now. So,
also later on. So that's good. Next question.
Good morning and thanks, Dieter. This is Gabriele Favaro from Sesamo, Brussels. We represent machine tool builders and we've been working on cybersecurity, especially on the raising awareness part. And one of the problems that we've encountered is basically the fact that most of times policymakers do not have a clear understanding on the difference between IT and OT security. And that was very tough also because it's a double-sided problem, because most of the SMEs are kind of sure that buying one solution fits all software or this kind of temporary solutions are okay for their production. So I wanted to basically ask you a kind of thoughts on that. So how could we engage and let's say explain better what it is about OT security in this context, and how do you feel that policymakers and institutions could act in this regard, maybe with some guidelines, maybe with, as you said, test scenarios and other kind of these initiatives. Thanks.
Well, on regards of policymakers, I can only speak of the Belgian side of it. It largely depends on the sectors they're active within. So as you heard, I'm active within the nuclear sector, and the regulators then, the policymakers there, they are influencing the real policymakers. They have a decent set of knowledge on cybersecurity level, but I do not know if that's the case within every sector out there. What does help are or will be the NIS2 guidelines that are coming up, which are approved by European policymakers, so that should help. For organizations themselves, I would say that risk assessments, together with management and all necessary people around the table, so tabletop exercises on risk assessments, will help seeing or showing them the light with regards to OT cybersecurity. And this could also mean that necessary budgets are freed, that awareness programs can be started up and things like that. But they first have to, they first have to open their eyes, to say it like that. And in certain organizations, that can take a lot of time. For example, one organization I'm working in, it took 4 years for them to finally accept the fact that OT cybersecurity is really important, and that management acknowledged the fact and freed up budget. But it depends from one organization to another. In SMEs, it might typically take a little bit longer. But for SMEs, unfortunately, the Picanol scenario helps making sure that the OT cybersecurity is brought to the agenda.
I'll quickly also answer on that one, Gabriela, since I'm also pretty much involved in many of these discussions. Not sure how you feel about this, Dieter, but for my sake, the discussion or difference between OT and IT should fade away. I don't think we're today at the stage anymore where we can say that it's acceptable that there is this difference being made. I think we had a bit of time to understand, okay, OT is running a little bit behind on IT, but in today's environment, OT just has to keep up with the pace of IT. It's getting much closer to IT. We should not make a difference anymore between IT and OT. And also from an organizational perspective, it becomes much harder for companies to manage OT security versus IT cybersecurity. There's debates going on within companies, there's struggles going on. Cybersecurity should be managed as a whole, holistically. So,
Cybersecurity, yeah, true. It should indeed be managed as a holistic one, but we can never forget that requirements for the environments are a little bit different, and with that should be taken into account in the holistic approach for cybersecurity as well. So that requirements, for example, for a robot or a production line is a bit different than just a mail server, for example. And if that's also part of the risk assessments and the criticality assessments that need to be done within organizations. But completely saying it's the same, not yet. We might get there within 10 years, maybe. But knowing some big organizations, they're just in phase 0, to say it like that.
Well, the thing that happens now, and especially if you give them 10 years in addition, they're going to use it as an excuse, especially your members and the machine vendors. And I think we should not allow that.
We should push them forward.
Yes. And the question needs to come also from us as customers. I mean, if we start asking much more about it, then they will need to start adopting. And like the thing on the bill of materials, the SBOMs, that's a mandatory regulatory requirement in the US now for all of the machines that are being purchased by the US government or departments. They have to have this.
Yes, exactly. And that's something that should be starting up as well here in Europe and Belgium, at least, so that we don't have surprises anymore like Log4j, for example.
I'm going to take one more question and we'll do a short break, Dieter, and then moving over to Lennart.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you for the interesting presentation. I'm not expert in cybersecurity either, but I'm working in mainly hybrid manufacturing systems, especially logistics supply chain management. So my question will be, will that be coming as an ISO system to secure that when you choose the suppliers, when you actually want to build up the supply chains, that you can actually place a single things like see that for, let's see, the previous quality requirement, you have the ISO 9000, 40,000 for environmental issues. Will that be coming like a protocol that you can simply place in the requirement when you want to source in the supplier? And if it's not at present time, what's your estimation that system will come into place? Thank you.
But to be honest, it's already coming. I mentioned the IEC 62443, for example, and in that we have certification for products and solutions that should comply to the IEC 62443-4 series of the standard. So that's already coming. So we have also certification bodies that allow certification of systems to the IEC 62443, like that in Germany we have TÜV Nord, who is doing certifications, and I forgot the name of the other one, but it's already coming to make sure that those standards are followed within products and solutions. We have yet to see a similar thing for organizations, that they are compliant in doing things on the IEC 62443, but I think it's also coming. The one thing we may not and never forget is that compliance is not necessarily meaning that it's secure. So it might be compliant, but that's only a start for having a secure system, in my opinion.
Yeah, but it's a good start in any case. So if you said you're looking for something to ask the vendors, so you can ask indeed for this IEC 62443, which was actually also mentioned in relation to the TRINITY project during the review meeting by one of the different reviewers, to broadcast a little bit more about this. So we do that now. So that's specific standards, and then the -4 specifically needs in terms of devices.
Yes.
They need to be, for instance, compliant to that, and you can have an organization external doing the review. But indeed, it doesn't give you a guarantee that it's cyber secure, for sure. Okay. Thank you very much, Dieter, on the
You're welcome.
Belgium, for your contributions and elaborations here. I'm going to take a short break, coffee break, and then you can stay online if you want to see also Leonard's presentation.
Unfortunately, I have another call, so but I've sent the presentation to you, Ulrich. Should you receive any other questions during the day for me, just let me know. I'll be happy to respond to them.
Super. Thank you very much. In any case, Dieter, and speak to you soon.
Have a nice day over there. Talk to you later.
Okay, so there's a coffee machine here, which we borrowed, but maybe you can also go to the bar next door, the owner restaurant, where you can take a coffee, whatever sort of coffee you like, and then we'll reconvene here in like 5 minutes or so, 5 minutes. Yeah, we're okay. Okay.
This was interesting. To what extent has it actually been incorporated into the agreement, right? Putting the liabilities for each requests? Yes. No, it's from the device. That should do whatever you can to protect, but if somebody shoots it, and who is responsible? It's a criminal. No, but it is also, you're not using legal mechanisms to make people step up.
Yeah, I'm not sure if people also following online. So I can just plug in the HDMI cable into my laptop. The only thing I'll do is I'll grab an extension cable because my battery isn't fully charged.
Ensure that different parts of the value chain or whatever steps up and do it next to make sure. And how do you do that? Incentives, punishments, whatever. So you're pretty likely you still have the sensor up to the high. Exactly. It's pretty sensitive for me to accept the liability. That's what the problem is. You actually have to pay for it. I can provide any for it. Just pay. So you can't expect. And the customers need to I agree. So a more robust sensor edge device, whatever, format into your system. It's more expensive. And I mean, it's like it's like bring the devices. But now what I'm finding is not grids as well. Well, you know what? Come on, you don't so anyway, so they work. So therefore, no, så sånn type her systemet og da gikk du igjennom så det score, og så fikk du sånn poengsum, og så til slutt så gikk du helt der dette. Så det gjort et eller annet, var det sånn tidlig i mye tidligere prosess. Er det viktig at du må liksom hele tiden gjøre sånn så nå setter du det var liksom den siden på det og så så skjer det med han Tangen, Microcontroller. Han ble jo de laget en setup på. Hva tror du han gjorde? Han ble jo fra Kristiansand. Så da var det sånn en eller annen vis, de laget rett og slett et hjem fra lokalsnaps. Så skrev de, hei, nå er du på Golfmarsjef, og vi er utrolig stolt over at du kommer herfra, og vi vil gjerne gjøre sånn jeg tror du kan se på det. Så kjempefint. Vi vet hva for spørsmål. Sånn og så sendte han tilbake. Så fikk jeg tilbake. Vi må skrive en artikkel her, og vi bare se gjennom den. Der. Det er ikke. Så begynner når man sier de er ganske Also die concept of psykolog.
Anything that I can help with? It should be.
I think you know better than me. Microsoft Vamos fazer a mail kjapt, og så kommer det tilbake til kaffe. It's like maybe 1 megabit. Exceptionally slow. And 4G is like I'm using the phone. That's not good. Not good. It's like was so slow.
No, because I did have an
There's a way to request like guest accounts, but you have to do it in advance. So I'm not aware of any like open networks you can just use without a login.
So Leuven, you don't have that kind of open network.
Well, most people here are students, and they just use a
They
payroll.
do.
And then
I think I might. Well, I don't know if I tried it. I don't remember the password anymore.
there's a way to request guest access like, if you have events like this, but you have to do it in advance. So
Because I need to update the slides. Not like I want to watch something on the presentation, but yeah, because we have to upload the presentation on Mqtt. And for some reason, even the mobile is not working. The mobile data. It's strange.
Sometimes it does, very slowly.
It's 3G.
Yeah, I guess it's all the Europeans.
all the conflict doesn't really help.
Isn't it supposed to be one of the best or probably Europeans #1 in innovation?
I think it is one of the top ones, yes.
So
and outside, the 4G will probably work perfect.
We're ready for you, man. Het enige is nu natuurlijk dat de zoomers gaan nu niet meer zien.
Zijn er nog mensen?
Ja. Wacht, hoe gaan we dat doen? Kun je anders je slides doorsturen in de rapte?
700 megabyte, dus wat tegen de video en zit.
Om dat nog in de rapte te doen, hè. Wacht, we kunnen doen. Kun je nog op zoeken?
Sorry to interrupt. Could we just get something to drink over there?
You can go and ask in any case. You want to join?
If we have a plan, it's fine.
No, it's fine. These two cards. Authenticate and pay. Just put it against it. You don't need You don't need to pin. Just ask for the receipt, please.
Sorry, Eric, do you have the access for the Wi-Fi?
No, I'm afraid not. We need to, that's a whole procedure. And since we're only here for half a day, I was guessing, and I was actually guessing that most of us would have EduRoam access, but you don't have EduRoam either. It's okay.
Works other places, but now it doesn't work.
Okay, strange. And the campus room neither?
I am connected to Edu.
Ja, but de mijne werkt dan ook niet zo. Wacht, hè. Kan ik hem via WhatsApp zo? De link?
Mail is misschien makkelijk.
Mail, ja.
Zijn er ook mensen die dat ook met second geweest?
Ja, Wim is daar met een aantal mensen van zijn team.
Ik ben maandag ook daar geweest. Zo kunnen dat er een beetje overlappen zijn, maar ik weet niet of hij een presentatie
Dat gaat niet veel uitmaken. Wacht, hè. Dat gaat u enkel dat gaat u laten registreren, dat is niet de bedoeling. Dat gaat u op een andere manier doen. Thank you. Ja.
Kan ook een USB-stick gaan?
Dat kan ook, ja. Ik heb hier een USB-stick bij. Ik ben aan het zien, hè, voor, maar het probleem is dat dat een ongoing zo is. Ik kan die niet meer editen nu, dus ik kan u de link niet doorsturen. Dat is de issue. Yeah. So for our guests online, we're going to be resuming in a couple of minutes, and we're just switching over from the different laptops to make sure that you guys can also see what's happening here. So we'll be back in a couple of seconds. unmute myself. Deel of netwerken. Dankjewel. I think we're ready to go then. Press the key immediately to the right of shift. Klik een keer even. Even klikken. Het herkende als een keyboard.
Ja, ik heb alle knopjes goed.
Ja, we zullen zien wat het hem geeft zelfs. Dan is het gewoon tappen. Alright. This is one thing.
De microfoon gebruiken voor Zoom, dan gaat het zonder.
Deze? Ja.
Ja, ik weet niet.
Ik heb daar juist gebruikt. Ja.
Ja,
Okay. So we wanted to make sure that also our online community on the one hand side and also for the future recording afterwards, we would have the screens available, but we're there now. So I'll do a little bit more of an introduction about this group and facilities during lunchtime. Okay. But in any case, I'm very happy that we also have from our partner group here named COSIC, which is part of the research group of this facility named ESAT of KU Leuven, wanted to participate in this morning's session. And as I've been telling you, some of you have seen Leonard in the video that you might have seen that has been going around worldwide as the person who hacked my car. But we're still friends. He has done that actually a couple of times, by the way. But in any case, the car is still there, and Leonard is also still here. But Leonard has basically made from his hobby sort of a profession, and that is really in trying to understand why and how devices are as insecure as they are, and how to do the analysis and what it actually results in. But also where it came from is what Leonard will explain to you now, and also some of the recent research works that he has been doing. Thank you.
Thank you for the introduction. I also had a first slide on what COSIC actually is, the research group. And I don't know how to operate a MacBook.
There you go.
Okay. So as you can see, we have 80 to 100 people working at COSIC, working on a lot of different types of research. So there's people that only do mathematics basically and try to make very secure ciphers. Some of you might have heard of the AES cipher or the Advanced Encryption Standard. If you've not heard of it, you've already used it a few times today without knowing. And that cipher was developed here at COSIC. So we have also people looking at more public key crypto, privacy of information systems, mobile and wireless security. And then finally, we have embedded systems and hardware security. And that's the team that I'm a part of. And that means that I spend a lot of my time in this room, in our lab. Usually I do a virtual tour, but you're lucky today because I can give you a real physical tour later. So I'm not going to talk about this slide too much. Now this talk is about embedded systems. And in a way, a robot is also an embedded system. So what do we consider an embedded system? There's a lot of variety in those. So you see a banking card, which might be the most secure embedded system each and every one of you owns. These chips are being rigorously tested in evaluation labs. They have light sensors inside of the chip so that if someone tries to shoot a laser at it, it will start erasing keys and so on. So these are really the very most secure devices you own. Then we also have very simple embedded devices like this Arduino Uno. That's an 8-bit microcontroller, pretty old architecture, relatively simple. It can control some LEDs, maybe drive a motor and so on. Then we go to slightly more complicated systems like the Raspberry Pi in the middle, on the right side of the slide. This is a more complex embedded device. It has a quad-core Cortex A53 processor inside of it. You can connect cameras to it. It can run an OS like Linux and so on. And then finally, probably the most complicated type of embedded device can be a gaming console. Again, a multi-core CPU, a GPU, and so on. Then there's a few more embedded devices, and they come in a lot of shapes and forms these days. People already were asking questions about coffee machines and so on. So today we've decided, or recently we've decided that everything needs to be connected to the internet. So we have smart vacuum robots, smart refrigerators, smart cameras, and so on. And as most of you probably know, these connect to some wired or wireless protocol, and then further connect maybe with a smartphone app, and then eventually also a cloud backend system. Now, I'm not going to talk much about the cloud backend system today because I usually take a different approach. Most attackers will try to attack the cloud system, and then maybe from there go to the embedded device. I take the other way around. So I attack the embedded device to then maybe potentially go up to the cloud infrastructure. And as I said, we really connect everything to the internet. So on the bottom right, we have a defibrillator, and this is connected to Wi-Fi. You can find these in airports, for example. The far left is a smart sex toy. There's a lot of those today, and I haven't seen any that were secure. So they make for a lot of fun stories and entertaining reads.
It was kind of nice how you said that they were made for a lot of fun.
Yeah. So most of the slides have links on them if you want to read these articles later. Yeah. So as with any IT system, we usually do threat modeling during the design phase of a device. I am not a threat modeling expert because I usually take the attacker role. So I try to ask myself the question, what is the easiest way to compromise a system? And I think less about how can we make it secure. But in any case, we usually ask ourselves the question, what are we trying to protect? So what is the asset we're trying to protect? And then what is the security objective? Who are we trying to protect that asset from? So what is the attacker model? What kind of attacker are we trying to protect from? And then, of course, the cost has to outweigh the benefit. And this is not only the case for the defenders, where maybe adding security costs money, but it's the same case for an attacker. If I have to do an attack that costs me $2 million, let's say, to compromise a single banking card, and I have to invest that same amount of money to compromise every single banking card, then that's probably not worth my time and money. So these are two examples that are, I think, quite famous and some scenarios that people don't always think about. So on the top right, we have a picture from the Snowden leaks, where it was leaked that basically NSA was intercepting devices on their way to the end customer, opening them up, modifying them, and then sending them along to the customer. So you can imagine if you buy a robot, it has to go through a lot of hands before it reaches you. And you need to have a way basically to confirm that nothing has been changed. Similarly, there was a Bloomberg article. I think it hasn't been actually confirmed, this story, but the story was that government agencies were implementing devices into servers, basically. And it's also important to, while doing threat modeling, of course, to keep the entire life cycle of a device into account, and we'll get to that more later on. Now, there's a lot of types of attackers that you can try to protect from. These are the classical examples. I'm not a big fan of this distinction in categories, but let's go for it anyway. I think researchers are probably the least of your worries because they're usually quite friendly. On the other hand, you have the nation state, which might have as a goal counterterrorism and so on. If your goal is to protect from a nation state, then you're likely going to have a bad time. Now, the two in the middle, I think, are quite interesting. So we have criminal enterprises, and of course, their goal is to obtain some sort of financial gain out of doing an attack. And similarly, industry competition, sometimes people call this competitive analysis, which is a nice way of saying reverse engineering the product of your competitor, maybe trying to steal some IP or compromising the device to basically harm their reputation. And these are things that happen in the real world, both of these cases. So on the top right is a famous example from the 1990s. So this was the days of pay TV, where you had satellite companies broadcasting encrypted television. To decrypt and watch the TV shows, you needed a smart card that you had to pay for. And there was a big market for people trying to attack these cards, copying them, and then basically selling copied smart cards to watch TV cheaper. And as it turns out, in this story, there was, of course, the financial gain of selling these cards, but it turns out that one pay TV provider was actually paying hackers to compromise the systems of their competitors. And there's a very nice documentary about this story that you can find online these days. A similar example, more recent, on the bottom right, was a tweet from Ledger. Ledger makes cryptocurrency hardware wallets. They also have their own hardware evaluations lab, and they occasionally take a look at a product made by their competitors. And of course, if they find a vulnerability, then they're going to publish it and market it. I'm not saying that the intent of Ledger here is to harm the reputation of their competitors, but I can see how some people might interpret it that way. Now, the most important thing to remember about hardware devices or embedded devices is that these are always exposed to a hostile environment. There's multiple people around, and those adversaries or attackers might have physical access to the device and might do physical attacks on them. Another thing to remember is that if you think, for example, about a laptop and it comes with Microsoft Windows, then Microsoft is going to assume that you as the user have the same goal as them. You're both trying to prevent a third party from attacking your laptop. If Microsoft sells you an Xbox, then they're basically trying to protect the Xbox from you, the legitimate user. Because if you as a legitimate user can compromise the Xbox and play pirated games, then of course they lose all of their market potential. And if I say playing pirated games and doing physical attacks on gaming consoles, then people really go very far in the lengths they're willing to go to just play pirated games. So on the bottom left is an example from the Xbox 360, where some people figured out that there's this chip inside of the disk reader, basically, and that one package actually contains two distinct chips on top of each other that are connected with very small wires. And as it turns out, if you touch one of these wires to ground, you can overwrite the code running on one of those chips, and that then allows you to play pirated disks, basically. So people were buying very small, fine drills on the internet, opening their gaming consoles, finding the exact right spot on that package, drilling a very fine hole, shorting a wire to ground, overwriting firmware, all just to play pirated games. Similarly, on the right, here people found that inserting a short glitch on the reset line of the processor would allow them to skip signature verification checks and then run their own code, again, to play pirated games. And here again, people commercialize this. So the white board on this screenshot is what we call a Mqtt chip. So it's a small device you buy, you implant it into your device, and you can now play pirated games. There's a very nice talk about this entire story from someone at Microsoft, and they now explain it basically for the newer generations of consoles. They assume that if an attack costs more than $500 for each distinct device, then the attack is probably not worth it. Because that means that you have to invest basically 10 games before you can play a pirated game. Now, if we take a look at the device security lifecycle, as we call it, it's first the design phase. You first start with designing a device. And we always say that security has to be incorporated from the start, especially if we think about embedded devices, where fixing something might mean producing a new product. And then, of course, the strat models that we discussed earlier should be used during the design phase to inform your design decisions. Most embedded devices are made using off-the-shelf components. So you buy microcontrollers, you buy wireless chips, you put them together. And people inherently trust basically the manufacturer of those devices. I have an example later that shows that you cannot really trust them. And of course, as a security person, I always think about security, but I also understand that if you're making a robot that drives around in the physical world, then probably safety is more important than security. Then, of course, we have the manufacturing stage where you manufacture the device, where a lot of people get their hands on the electronics and the software you want to put in them, the keys and so on. And as a consumer, where you maybe buy a robot or a smart device at home, by the time you get the device, you can no longer really verify that it's the device the manufacturer intended to give to you. So maybe to compare this with software, if you download a software package on your laptop, we have a way of verifying that the software is legitimate. So we can hash the software, verify a signature over it, and we're sure that the software wasn't tampered with. Now, if you have a device, there's no way of hashing that in a mathematical function and verifying that it's real. So this is a real problem. Then, of course, we deploy the device and ship it, and people might compromise it during the deployment phase. And as I already said, it's difficult to verify that the device hasn't been modified. Another example here is I buy a smart vacuum robot from the internet. I use it for a week. Maybe I slightly modify it, and then I decide I no longer like it. So what do? I send it back. And now Amazon has my robot again, and they redistribute it to another customer. And now someone else, a random person, has now my modified vacuum robot. So these are things that can happen. And then, yeah, of course, you also have to maintain the product. So you need a way of updating the software. Updating hardware is more difficult, of course. And this has to be done in a secure manner. And here it's also important to think not just about the attacker, that's some random hacker on the internet, as people like to think, but also the people that actually interact with maybe robots in a physical environment. So there was a story about how people tried paying someone at Tesla, someone just on the manufacturing line, $1 million to plug in a USB drive into a certain system. And in this case, that person realized it wasn't a good thing to do, and they reported it, and that's why the story came out. But the other question is, how many people wouldn't have taken the $1 million? And then, of course, at some point, the device might become useless or obsolete, and you have to dispose of it. And that usually means that these devices end up on eBay. There's a lot of weird things you can find on eBay, a lot of very interesting things. You can really find industrial robots on eBay. So it's not that difficult to get to that hardware. So a lot of times people assume this is industrial grade equipment. There's no way someone would just get their hands on this and do physical attacks. But if you can buy it on eBay, then literally anyone can get access to it. On the bottom right is an example from infotainment systems that came out of Tesla cars. So they were replaced and then disposed of at the garage. Someone went dumpster diving, found a lot of these units. People started looking at them and could really extract camera footage and so on from these units. So with that, I want to take a look at a few case studies we did over the years. So one recent project we did was called the Hackable Home. This was a project we did for Test Aankoop together with Euroconsumers. So these are basically consumer rights organizations. And they asked us, how secure are all of these smart devices that we have today? And what is the privacy impact of these devices? So they bought, I think, 15 to 17 devices for us. We set them up in an office and then we monitored them for 2 weeks and we tried attacking them. So for each of these devices, we only had 1 day to try and find security issues in them. 1 day is not a lot of time. So this means that all the things we find are really low-hanging fruit, as we call it. And I have 2 examples from this project here. Now, usually when I start looking at an embedded device, and especially the more complicated ones that maybe run Linux or a real operating system, they always look something like this on the inside. So you have the main processor in the middle, then you need some volatile memory, some working memory, usually DRAM, and it's easy to spot these chips on a board because they are interconnected in a particular way. So DRAM is usually quite fast, and to connect it to the main CPU, all of the connections in between those 2 chips have to be the same length. And this is something you can easily see on a PCB. On the right, we have some non-volatile memory, and this is basically the type of memory that stores the operating system and all of the code that the device is running. Then there's 2 things we usually do. We look for debugging interfaces. And this is usually the easy way into a device if developers forgot to disable them. And then if that doesn't work, we look at the non-volatile memory. And I do a treasure hunt map on this, because if you read this data out, then usually you have a lot of information about the device. And you can use that information to find maybe more software-related vulnerabilities and then do an attack that scales. So let's take a look at the inside of a robot vacuum cleaner. So this has a quad-core CPU in it. It has some DRAM in it. And as I said, you can easily see on the board that that's a DRAM chip because of all the traces that go through are these squiggly patterns in them to make sure that they're the same length. So even without Googling, just by looking at the board, we already know what components do. And then on the top left, we have this NAND flash chip that stores all of the interesting information. Might be difficult to see on the slide, but on the top left, you can also see 2 test points that are labeled RX and TX. Someone that has looked at devices before immediately knows that this is probably a UART connector, and that can be a very easy way into the device. Now, if we zoom out a bit, then you can see the rest of the robot. So you can see the 2 motors that are there. We still have the green board that we were looking at earlier, the UART debug header. You can see the camera, because of course, every vacuum robot needs a camera, a microphone, and a speaker these days. The UART debug header, like I said, and then there's one interesting connector left on this board. I'll give you a second to look for it. You have to remember this is really on the inside of the robot. Normally, none of these connectors would be exposed to someone just seeing the robot. Did anyone see the connector? So on the bottom, we have a USB connector on the inside of the device. If I see something like this, I always get a bit excited because that usually means that there's an easy way into it. And in this case, the device was running the Android debug bridge, so basically the same as an Android smartphone. And if you think about it, this is just a smartphone. It has a quite complex processor, it has a camera, it has a microphone, and so on. And so through this Android debug bridge, I was able to log into the robot and really have a root shell on the robot. And this makes my life as an attacker a lot easier because I can now start debugging the device and figure out how it works. So then what we do is we build a setup that looks a bit like this. So we have a laptop connected to the robot vacuum cleaner with a USB cable so that we can interact with the file system and so on. We have a modified Android phone running the app of the robot because of course it also has an app to control it. On the laptop, we run standard network testing tools such as Burp Suite and Wireshark. And then we have a modified wireless router that basically allows us to send network traffic from the robots through the router to our laptop and then back to the internet. And that basically allows us to look at all the network traffic and maybe modify it where we want to. So then one of the things I always start looking at first is firmware updates, because there's usually low-hanging fruit there or easy to exploit bugs. And as it turns out, in this case, basically the phone app can send a command to a robot through the backend. So the phone app generates the command, sends it to the backend forwards it to the right robot. And a robot in this case is identified by this random looking target ID, which is basically an identifier for the robot. And here we found an API flaw, so a flaw in the backend system that basically allowed us to query which robots identifiers exist. So the fact that these are random no longer matters for us. Then there's an auth code, which is basically like a PIN code or a password. And here again, we found an API vulnerability that allowed us to query basically the password for each robot. Then what else is in this command is it's the action we want to perform. And in this case, 127 stands for software update. And then what the app does is it tells the robot, here's a URL, go and download this firmware and install it. And this is not necessarily a security issue because maybe the software updates are signed and verified on the robot end. But because we have access to the robot end, we can actually go and look how these software updates work. So we took the binary responsible for doing the update, so the bit of software that performs the software update. We load it into Hydra, which is a software reverse engineering tool. And then we started looking at the code responsible for doing the update. And finding that code was relatively easy because there's this nice thing in there that says, over-the-air update is progressing. Then we look at what the rest of this function does. And it first kills a process, then it removes a file, And then it takes some string and feeds it into wget, which is a Linux utility to basically download the file. And as you can see, what's being done here is the input we provide, the URL, is passed into the string, and then the code is calling system with that string. I'm not sure if there's people that look at code a lot, but if you see something like this and you've looked at code before, you can quite quickly see that there's an issue here. Does anyone want to take a guess? Sorry? Yes, so in a way, yes. So the URL we're passing to it is not being verified in any way by this code. And this means that we can do something that's called OS command injection. So basically, to recapitulate, the robot parses packets received from the backend. And one specific packet is used to trigger a software update. And this packet includes URL. The update is downloaded using wget, and URL is not sanitized. And this means that we can do OS command injection. So basically, instead of giving it a normal URL with a firmware download link, we give it a URL that looks a bit weird and looks like this. And if we send this URL to the robot, it will first download this update file. Then it will make that update file executable, and then it will run it. And because of the way the software works, we have to do a few special tricks to make sure that the robot actually does what we want. And this is, of course, nice, because now we can send just an executable to the robot and it will do whatever we want. And this, of course, gives us a nice idea, because now we can maybe create a vacuum robot botnet. So what do? We enumerate existing robot IDs to the backend API. To a second API bug, we find the passcode for each of these robots. So now we can send each of these robots a command to update, which means that they will basically download our code and just execute it. And of course, this update can do whatever we want. We can make the robot drive around, we can look at the camera, we can just be silent and only extract camera images and so on. And this really means that we can take over all of the robots made by this manufacturer and do whatever you want with it. And in this case, this is a white label product, which means that there's one manufacturer somewhere that makes these robots, sells them to 20 or 30 different companies that get a nicely modified box with different colors and their branding on it. The app is slightly modified with their own branding. So the same product is sold by 30 different manufacturers. And it's quite difficult to figure out how many of these robots are actually out there. Now, a second robot we looked at as part of this project for test ankle was a proscenic vacuum robot. And this one works quite well. I was surprised because it's quite cheap and still it works really well because it has what they call a laser guidance system. And that means that it's very good at avoiding obstacles and not bumping into things and so on. And on the bottom left, you can see a map basically of the office you're vacuuming with this robot. And you can even see the office chairs here and small legs that the robot really went around. And this is nice because on the map, you can also say like this zone, don't vacuum there. So I had a lot of wires there, so I asked the robot not to vacuum there. And then we started monitoring the network traffic. And as it turns out, this robot sends basically the map over the internet to the manufacturer in plain text. So anyone along the way can also read the map. Which is, of course, not really a good thing to do. Here again, I found a USB port that was hidden on the bottom of the device. From there, I could log into the device and make changes. So again, if I would have just bought this vacuum robot, made changes, and then returned it because I no longer want it, then someone else ends up with my malware basically installed in their vacuum robot. And then what's really worrying about this specific case, or at least I think is worrying, is that the manufacturer that makes this vacuum robot also makes industrial robots. So they really make mowing robots, shopping robots, as they call them, and industrial grade robots. Now, these are, of course, more difficult for me to obtain, so I didn't test them, but yeah, it's not a good sign. A third device we looked at was the Motorola Comfort Connect, which is a type of baby monitor that people buy. It's a relatively expensive one, from what I can tell, and it's sold under the brand Motorola. I think everyone agrees, if you see this box in the supermarket or wherever, that you will assume this is made by Motorola. As it turns out, it's not. It's made by someone else, and Motorola does the branding basically. So you really have no clue what you're buying. So the camera shown on the left connects to Wi-Fi, can also be controlled from an app or from the second device that they have with it. And basically the app can send you alerts when the baby wakes up or something like that. So what do? We open up the hardware to see what's inside, because that's for me the easiest way to get into something. I see a few test points. I can again make an educated guess. This is going to be UART. I connect some wires to it. And in this case, it didn't give me root on the camera immediately, but it gave me access to a bootloader interface. From that bootloader interface, I could read out the firmware of the device and then again start looking at the code. Then we do the same thing. We take a look at how the firmware updates are implemented. And they are implemented in not really a great way. So the robot or the app basically asks a backend server, is there a new update? The server says yes. Here's a link where you can download the update. And they actually made an attempt at encrypting that firmware update. So when I first downloaded it, I couldn't look inside because it was encrypted. But the way they encrypted it was not really the way you should be doing it. So I could, of course, look at the code on the camera and look at how they decrypt these firmware updates. And so for people that know something about encryption, they're using AES and CBC mode. So the cipher that I set that was designed here was also being used in that camera. The cipher itself is very secure. If you had access to all of the computers on the planet, you still wouldn't be able to break it. But you can use it in a really incorrect way, and in that way, basically, make the system fail. So what they had was basically that the encryption key was being derived from the file name of the update. So if you see the update file name, you can derive the encryption key. And the IV for CBC mode was hard-coded in the firmware update. So once you know this, it's trivial to decrypt the update, and it doesn't add any security. Now, of course, what we're interested in is how does this camera and the app communicate with this backend that they connect to. And I found that they were using a system called Mqtt, which is quite often used in this type of system. And you basically have topics that you can subscribe to. So you listen on a certain URL for information that's encoded. So a camera would basically subscribe to the /v1 devices and then its unique identifier, and then basically wait for commands that were maybe being sent by the backend or by the phone app. And of course, the camera also has to reply to these commands, so it publishes in a different topic. Now, what the manufacturer did in this case, they used something called client certificates or client authentication, which is actually a good practice. It's a good thing to do. But of course, because I have access to the firmware of the camera, I can get the client certificate and the client private key. And this means that I can use my laptop to connect to that backend server and act as if I'm that Motorola camera. This by itself might not be a very big issue. But then if we start looking at how this MQTT server is configured, we see that we can do a wildcard subscription, which basically means subscribe to every topic and see all of the data that is being sent to every single camera. So now we already, of course, gain a lot of information about every camera. And to go a step further, it turns out that any camera can basically publish in any topic. So this means that with this client private key that I extracted from one camera, I can now start sending commands to every single camera Motorola sells. So this means that just by compromising a single device, we can compromise any device that they have. We can have all the cameras just randomly rotate. We can play random audio clips to all of these cameras. We can deactivate alerts. So if the baby wakes up, you no longer get an alert on your phone. We can factory reset all of these devices and so on. And one thing that's not on this slide is looking at the camera feed. And that's probably because I only had one day to look at this device. And so, as I said, attacking a single hardware device can lead to a system-wide compromise. And people usually assume no one is interested in hacking me, or I'm never going to be a target, I'm not interesting enough. If someone can attack every single device, then they probably don't really care who you are. So there's a few things here that went wrong, obviously. So during the design phase, there's quite a few indications that security wasn't really part of or wasn't a main design goal for these products. So you find hard-coded cryptographic keys in plain text. Nothing seems to prevent fake robots or fake devices. So a backend is not able to distinguish between a device we make and the actual manufacturer makes. The devices didn't have any secure boot or verified boots. Debug interfaces were left enabled, and so on. Now, another type of product I've looked at a lot in the past are these car key fobs. So the things we use to unlock our personal robots, you could say, our cars. So over the years, we've looked at the Tesla Model S key fob initially. So where we found that they were using a 40-bit cryptographic key to protect your car. 40-bit cryptographic key was probably considered insecure in... We replaced DES, which had a 56-bit cryptographic key in the early 1990s, I guess. So 40 bits was probably considered insecure way before that. And then to make it even worse, we started looking at, well, and another thing that happens with cars is usually car manufacturers are assemblers. They buy a lot of systems and put them together, and they don't always know what they buy. And in this case, it turns out that that same key fob technology was also being bought by McLaren and Fisker. So two other brands of very expensive cars, basically. And what we show there is that we can really walk up to someone, copy the key fob, go back to their car and drive off. And this only takes a few seconds. Then other cars we looked at are made by Toyota, Hyundai, and Kia. And there we found that they basically managed to do even worse. So they only had 24-bit cryptographic keys. And here the trick was first, again, buying a module of one of these cars online on eBay, doing a physical attack on the module, extracting firmware, learning how the device works. And once you do that, you can easily compromise all of these cars. And then the most recent key fob thing I did was looking at the Tesla Model X key fob, and this is where we stole Ulrich's car. We have video of that later. So let's take a bit more of a look at that device. So of course, I'm a researcher here at the university, so all of these projects also have a paper associated with it. It's publicly available if you want to read into it. So most cars these days, if they have a key fob, you can unlock them in two ways. You can press a button, and then the car unlocks from a distance. This is what we usually call remote keyless entry. And then passive keyless entry is if you have the key fob in your pocket, you walk up to the car, and then it automatically unlocks for you. Now, if we take one of these key fobs and we look at the inside, this is what we find. This is a fairly complex key fob in comparison to other brands, let's say. And so what we can find here is a Bluetooth Low Energy microcontroller. So that already indicates that the system is using Bluetooth. There's a range extender chip for Bluetooth. And there's a low frequency chip. That's very common in car keys, that they use two distinct frequencies. So the lower frequency one is usually used for the passive entry side, because that sort of limits the distance. And then we see an accelerometer, which is used to try and prevent relay attacks, where you've maybe seen videos of someone with a big antenna standing next to someone's door, someone else with a second antenna standing next to the car, and the car then just unlocks. This accelerometer is to try and prevent that type of attack, where the car will only automatically unlock if the key fob is moving in your pocket. And then finally, we see a common criteria certified secure element made by Infineon. So if I see a chip like this, then I start to get a bit worried, because those are very secure. You could compare this to the chip you find in your banking card. So I know as an attacker, if I want to attack this individual chip, I'm going to have a really hard time. And I'm probably not going to bother with it. So that's another defense technique you can deploy, is basically frustrating the attacker and hoping that they just move on to something else. And it can be very effective. Yeah. So in this case, what we're going to do as the attacker is we're going to basically ask the key fob to unlock the car for us. And the way we develop this attack is basically first we start looking at this key fob. So again, we first look at the hardware. There's a lot of test points on this board, so I solder wires to them. I attach a logic analyzer, and then I look at how these different chips are communicating with each other. And from that, I already learn more information. So I know that if you press a button on the key fob, the microcontroller is going to handle that button press, is going to ask the secure element to produce an unlock code, and then a Bluetooth Low Energy microcontroller sends that over Bluetooth to the car. And this is basically the fundamental flaw, you could say, in the system, because as long as you can talk to the secure element, you don't really care how secure it is. If I can ask the secure element to unlock the card for me, that's good enough for an attack.
The original key you also bought it over eBay.
Yeah, so we bought a few of the key fobs on eBay, and you can also buy the body control module. I have a picture of that later on the internet. Because of course, if you have a car like this, it's quite dangerous to start working immediately on the car itself, especially if someone uses the car as a daily driver, then it's quite dangerous. At some point, when we were testing on Ulrich's car, I did break the car momentarily, so there was 30 minutes that were quite stressful, where I could no longer open the car, even with the real key fob.
Then he came back like completely red.
And luckily, the app still worked to unlock the car, and you could reset the car, and then everything was fine again. So it turns out that these key fobs are basically like Bluetooth headphones. So if you power them on, so if you take out the battery, put it back in, you can actually find the key fob on your phone and connect to it. And you have certain apps that allow you to see basically what sort of services these key fobs expose. And in this case, there are two of these services that look very interesting to us. So one is called over-air download, and that's basically the terminology Texas Instruments uses to say software update over the air, or over-the-air software update. And secondly, we have an application protocol data unit interface. Has anyone ever heard of APDUs before? So APDUs are the sort of commands you send to a smart card or to a banking card. So if you have a banking terminal and you insert your card, the banking terminal will send APDU commands to the card. And so from seeing this, I can already basically assume that this interface can be used to send commands to the secure element. So now we're going to take a brief look at these two interfaces individually. And of course, here the obvious attack would be to, through this interface, ask the secure element to give us an unlock code. But of course, the people at Tesla are also not idiots. So they blocked this sort of command in the firmware, so you weren't able to do this sort of attack. And the second part is this over-air download system. And this is also an example that shows where you cannot really trust the manufacturer of the products you buy or the chips you buy. So there was an implementation included for over-air download in the example code provided by Texas Instruments, the manufacturer of this chip. And again, they use AES, which is a good thing to do, but you have to use it well. So on the left, we see the plain text firmware image, as we say. So you can see that there's some structure in this data. And you can see that once it's encrypted, at the bottom, there is still structure in this data. And this means that it's badly encrypted, because that structure at the bottom of the firmware is really all I need to decrypt the entire firmware image and see it in plain text. Now, Tesla made a good decision here, and they decided to not use the system provided by Texas Instruments, and they made their own implementation. And they did not care about confidentiality of the firmware, so they did not encrypt it, but they signed it. And for that, they used SHA-1 with an RSA signature over it, which is okay. And then the idea here is that, of course, the RSA signature would be verified by the secure element. So the microcontroller could ask the secure element if the update was valid. And in this case, the result of the secure element was just being ignored. So if the secure element said this software update is not legitimate, then the microcontroller would still install it anyway. And I think this is probably a leftover from development, where a developer disabled this functionality to make it easier for them to try the update mechanism and so on, and then forgot to re-enable it. So now we have a sort of attack in mind. We can take out the battery of the key fob, put it back in, connect to the key fob, and push our own malicious firmware update to that key fob. That malicious firmware update was changed so that we can send whatever APDU command to the secure element that we want. We can then, through that interface, ask the secure element to give us a code to unlock the car. And then we can use that code to unlock the car. And of course, this is pretty stupid, because if I have to take the battery out of your key fob to do an attack, then no one will care, right? So the question here is, how can we do this without taking the battery out of the key fob? And for that, we took a look at this body control module. So this is one of the ECUs you find inside of a Tesla, basically. There's quite a lot of parts to this board. The people that have looked at electronics before can immediately spot certain things that at least from a security perspective, we don't really care about. So the only area we really care about is where you have these red squares drawn on. And there we see a main microcontroller that's responsible for the entire workings, basically, of this board. And then the secure element next to it. And this secure element is the same type of chip we found in the key fob. Now, as it turns out, this body control module is able to send a low frequency command, so over this shorter distance channel, to the key fob to force it to wake up and then start advertising as connectable. Now, it turns out that if we would take the body control module from Uri's car, we would only be able to use that module to attack Uri's key fob. And of course, I want the sort of module that I can use to attack any key fob. So what we do is we remove the secure element from this board. We replace it with a simple USB to serial converter shown here. And this now allows me to trick this body control module into believing it belongs to any vehicle I want. And this is based on the VIN number of a car. Now, the VIN number is not secret information. If you walk up to Uri's car, you can read it from the windshield and maybe steal his car later. So what do we do now? So we modify the first step of our attack plan. We use this modified body control module to ask the key fob to wake up and advertise as connectable. We connect to it, we update the firmware, we send an APDU command to the secure elements. We can now basically go back to the car and unlock the car, but we can only use that command to unlock the car. We cannot use it to start the car. But at this point, what we have done is we have elevated our privileges, as people like to say. So we've been able to get physical access inside of this car. So what can we do from there? So from there, we can start looking at how an actual service technician in a garage would pair a new key fob to this car. And what they use in the garage is this software tool shown on the right. It's called Tesla Toolbox. Now, you have to be a certified Tesla technician to get access to this software. As you can see, I'm not a Tesla technician, but as with anything, these things leak to the internet. So once you find them, you have access to the software and you can start figuring out how it works.
Get your Tesla
So in this case, they tried to protect from certain attacks. So where some of the software or the interesting bits were encrypted. But as you can imagine, to actually use software, you have to decrypt it before you use them. It's relatively straightforward to retrieve the plain text software. So how does this work in a real scenario? You have a technician with a laptop with the software running. They have a USB to CAN interface to communicate with the body control module inside of the car. They have a USB to Bluetooth module to communicate with the key fob. And because they are real Tesla technicians, they have a special password that allows them to talk to a backend hardware security module. And this hardware security module is used to sign certificates and so on. So because I only have the software, I cannot interact with this HSM. So I couldn't just use this software, even though I had it, to pair a key even to my own car if I wanted to. But we can use the software, of course, to learn more about how the pairing protocol works. And so what we did was we made a small setup, a lab setup, where we have the body control module and the key fob. And we interact with the PCM over CAN to figure out how everything works. This takes a lot of effort, but I'm not going to go into the details here. And then by doing this type of thing, we figure out how a new key fob is actually being paired at the security level. So what's the protocol that's being used? And as it turns out, Tesla made a good attempt at implementing something securely. So the secure element in every key fob basically has certificates that were signed by a backend maintained by Tesla. So if you buy a new key fob, it doesn't actually have that certificate yet. And the assumption is you need a service technician with access to the HSM to get a signed certificate on your key fob. Of course, there's only one reason to have signed certificates, and that's if you verify them. So the idea here would be that if you use this key fob with a car, the car would verify this is a valid certificate, and I trust that this is made by Tesla and it's a valid key fob. Now, if we look at the pairing protocol, when we actually start pairing the key fob to the car, these certificates are never used anywhere. And this is, of course, an issue. I'm not going to go into the details of the entire protocol because I guess most people don't really care. But what we can do is we can do a similar trick as with the body control module. We remove the secure element from a real key fob, and then we basically use a USB to serial converter and a Python script to make our own version of a secure element. So the microcontroller, the Bluetooth microcontroller in this key fob has no clue that the secure element has been removed. And now I can use this one key fob not only to steal Ulrich's car, but basically any of those cars, because I can in software just act as if I'm a different key fob and so on. So our plan of attack is relatively simple. So as before, we connect to the key fob, do the firmware update, get a code to unlock the car, go back to the car, unlock it, get inside, attach our tool to the diagnostic port of the car, and then pair our modified key fob to the car. So now the car thinks we have a legitimate key fob inside of the car, and of course, then we're able to also drive off. Now we don't only do these attacks theoretically, we try to show that they can be an issue in practice. So we built this device that allows us to carry out the attack for real. So it's made out of basic components that everyone can buy online. So there's a Raspberry Pi with a candle shield on it so that I can talk to the modules inside of the car and so on. Just a battery and then the modified key fob. On the backside, we have this body control module we got from eBay and slightly modified. And that's then everything we need to basically steal the car. So we made a video to show you how this would work in practice. So we have Ulrich arriving at this building, the other side of this building, parking the car. And then as with any electric car, you have to charge it at some point. So that also makes it easier to find your target, basically. Usually those people stay around, I have to wait for half an hour so they're nearby. So what I do is I take my tool, I walk up to the car, I read the VIN number from the windshield, as we said earlier. I enter it in my tool, and at this point, I'm walking around with a body control module that believes it belongs to Ulrich's car. Now we go up to Ulrich, we tell his key fob to wake up, and then we can start connecting to it over Bluetooth. And since this is Bluetooth, we can already start walking away because Bluetooth works over a longer distance. We push our firmware update to the key fob, and then once the update is complete, the key fob restarts, we reconnect, and then we start asking the secure elements to give us one-time valid unlock commands. These commands you can only use once to unlock the car, and you have to use them in the same order as you get them from the secure element, because any newer command invalidates older ones. This is a classic implementation of what we call a rolling code. So we can unlock the doors with these commands, and this is a Model X, so of course we also open up the Falcon windows. So this is good. So now we've almost finished the attack. We can get inside of the car. And then as if we are a real service technician, we attach our tool to the debug connector that's under the center display. The entire tool is controlled from my phone. So then on the phone, I will initiate basically the pairing process. Just some stuff scrolling over the screen for me to debug. And at this point, we have a new key fob, a malicious key fob paired to the car. And now, of course, we behave as a normal key fob. The car will send us a challenge. We compute a valid response, and then we allow it to drive off. And of course, the big difference here with a relay attack is that I can go back at any time. Probably still now, I could go back to Ulrich's car and drive off with it with this key fob. So to conclude this presentation, it's important to remember that probably all embedded devices live in a hostile environment where people might try to physically attack the devices throughout the entire life cycle of the device. People often use firmware or software to hide secret information, but you have to assume that with an embedded device, there's always a way for the attacker to get access to the firmware. And you should basically assume that the device has to remain secure, even if the firmware is publicly available. Now, I mainly covered attacks in this presentation. There's a lot of countermeasures that exist, but I think it makes sense to first look at how devices can be attacked before you even try to defend against attacks. And as you can see, the widespread adoption of a lot of these countermeasures is still quite lacking because it's still relatively easy to attack devices. So that's it for this presentation. I'm happy to answer questions now, and if you have questions later, you can always contact me.
If you have a car that needs to be hacked,
yeah. I have had this happen at a conference where someone walked up to me with a Tesla Model S key fob, and they asked me if I could tell if it was still vulnerable. Because those key fobs, they couldn't update over the air. So you basically had to request a service technician to give you a new key fob that was updated. So there's still some of those cars are still vulnerable.
Did you mention also the PIN code?
Oh yeah, so nowadays in Tesla, if you enter, you can activate an option that's called pin to drive, where they ask you to enter a 4-digit PIN. And that's also to prevent these types of attacks that we've shown.
So then you can still enter all of my things out of the car, but at least it cannot drive it.
There might still be ways around it. I think, yeah.
So would the key with you? So would the modified key work still now? If you get it work once, you can use it.
Yeah.
Oh, good thing already used.
Yeah.
Then he has to come with all of his equipment.
So the issue there is that Tesla updated some parts to prevent this attack. So updating the key fob software no longer works, can no longer do that part of the attack. But updating the protocol, how they pair key fobs and so on, they consider too complicated, because that would mean not only updating every car and every module inside of every car, but also the software that the technicians use and so on. So that part, as far as I know, is still not fixed today. So as long as I can get into the car, I can still do this type of attack.
Yeah, just a stupid rhetoric question, but I bet you made a lot of friends at Tesla with this stuff.
I made a lot of what? Friends.
A lot of friends.
Frenemies.
What was their responsibility?
Usually in my experience, I actually did a presentation on Monday and I got a similar question. So I have a slide for it. We call this disclosure bingo, where if you submit a bug to a manufacturer, there's a wide range of responses you can get. And here there's a few. This is a bingo card made by Pentest partners in the UK. In case of Tesla, it's quite okay. They're a relatively big company. They're used to people reporting bugs to them. And they even have a bug bounty program, so you can get some money out of submitting bugs like this. So they are quite okay with this. They also have a contest, or the Zero Day Initiative has a contest they call Pwn to Own every year, where Tesla also usually competes. And there you can get up to $500,000, I think, plus the car for certain types of security issues. And then, yeah, some of the other, like the more IoT products, yeah, because they're often, like I said, it's a white label product, but it takes effort to even figure out who actually made the product. And then to contact them is usually quite a hassle. And in some cases, we just don't receive any reply. And then, yeah, there's not much we can do anymore.
So yeah, first of all, congrats to Cyberpunk. I have two questions. First of all, if I understood right, the original design of Tesla was okay, but they left some gaps in the system. That's what you use it.
Yeah.
If they didn't leave any of those, would you be able to hack it still?
I guess that's the entire point of doing. If there are no security holes, then it's impossible to break a device. That's, yeah, but there's a big but, of course. Security is always a trade-off between many things. And as I said earlier, there's a lot of different types of attackers, and there's a lot of things we can do with hardware that I haven't shown today. I would say there's always a way in. You can only limit the amount of effort and money that someone has to spend to get in. And you want to limit it to a point where it becomes impractical or not interesting for them to do it. Like if it would take me $1 million to get into Ulrich's car, then I could just buy 10 cars. Like there's no point anymore, right? So, yeah.
But just think of it on the other side as well. If you have unlimited resources and capabilities, and you would like to get into systems, maybe not a car, but military systems or whatever, then the same applies.
Yeah, and the other thing is, do you have biometric?
Biometric.
What about that?
I haven't put that myself. So by biometric, I assume you mean fingerprints and so on to unlock phones. Yeah, There are quite a lot of people that have looked at this in the past. I think 2 years ago, there was a talk at DEF CON where someone tried basically 10 or 15 different ways of copying a fingerprint and then evaluating which method works best for which type of fingerprint reader. So there are a lot of resources out there online. German hackers have shown that from pictures, they could copy the fingerprint and then really produce that fingerprint to something they could use. So there's a lot of ways that people try to attack these systems.
Yeah. And sometimes also the less obvious, maybe you don't need the biometric, which is the system behind it. Like
And also for biometrics, be aware of the mathematical strength of the biometrics. So entropy is not that high as you assume it would be. For example, what is it, the fingerprint? 160,000?
Yeah, I think there have been reported examples of where random people are able to unlock.
The big movements will use 60,001 essays on the device on the. So it's not that strong as you would assume. For example, a password has a much higher entropy than a fingerprint. A password with a developer strength has a much higher entropy than a fingerprint, for example. So manage your expectations. And also in blue biometrics, manage your GDPR. It's paying the access. For example, in Belgium, there's no legal base to do it.
Other questions? If not, Leonard, thank you very much. Great presentation as usual. I suggest for the people, because we're running a bit out of time, actually running out of time, for the people that have an interest in tagging along with Leonard, I think now is a good time. Huh?
Yeah, sure.
Best to do that in smaller groups of about 8 to 10 people. So who would like to see so half of you? Okay. So that's Leonard's strange R&D lab, everything in there. So this is playground. So then tag along with Leonard in a group of, I'd say the first 3 rows here that indicated. Luca will join you. Luca will join. So he will join you, and he will then come back and search for the other group just a little bit later on. What the rest of us will do is we'll go to the level 5, where we have some sandwiches lunch for those of you who already want. We can get ourselves settled. I see that in the boardroom we have only 20 seats plus or minus, and I think here there's a few more people. Are there people not planning to attend the meeting of this afternoon? You are new. Or is everybody intending to meet intending to participate in the meeting this afternoon? So I guess without saying anything, that means yes. Okay, right, good. Okay, then we'll just find ourselves another couple of chairs to do that, because we'll need to liberate this room at 2 here. That's going to. This is the exam period of the university, so this will be used for exams. Somebody had a question? Best to take your stuff. And for the people online, so this concludes also our activities for this morning. And thanks for joining. I will, of course, see you again shortly in the next occasion. So thank you, and see you soon.